The roar of 3 Lamborghini engines shattered the quiet morning in the poor neighborhood, their gleaming bodies reflecting the sunlight like jewels dropped into dust. Neighbors rushed to their windows, children stopped playing, and time seemed to freeze as 3 men in expensive suits stepped out of those magnificent machines. They walked with purpose toward a small, weathered house at the end of the street, the home of Mabel Henderson, an elderly woman who could barely afford her next meal. The question on everyone's mind was simple. Why were these obviously wealthy men visiting the poorest woman in town? The answer would reveal one of the most beautiful stories about kindness, gratitude, and the extraordinary power of love that the world had ever witnessed. Sit back and enjoy the story. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more. 20 years earlier, Mabel Henderson had been sitting at her kitchen table, counting coins for the 3rd time that week. Her arthritic fingers trembled as she separated pennies from nickels, trying to figure out how to make her meager pension stretch until the end of the month. The wallpaper peeled in the corners of her tiny kitchen, the linoleum floor was cracked and faded, and the single light bulb hanging from the ceiling flickered occasionally, reminding her that it too would soon need replacing. Another expense she couldn't afford. At 72 years old, Mabel lived alone in a house that had seen better days, in a neighborhood that had long been forgotten by prosperity. But despite her poverty, despite her struggles, Mabel possessed something that money could never buy: a heart overflowing with compassion. That particular evening, as the sun began to set and cast long shadows across her small yard, Mabel heard a timid knock at her back door. She shuffled over, her worn slippers making soft sounds against the floor, and opened the door to find 3 boys standing on her steps. They couldn't have been more than 12, 13, and 14 years old. Their clothes were dirty and torn, their faces smudged with grime, and their eyes held that hollow look of hunger that Mabel recognized all too well from her own childhood during the Depression. The oldest boy, a tall, thin child with dark hair matted against his forehead, spoke first. "Please, Mom," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "We haven't eaten in 2 days. Could you spare anything? Even just some bread?" Mabel's heart broke, looking at them. She knew she had only enough food for herself for the next few days, knew that sharing meant she would go hungry, knew that the rational thing would be to send them to a shelter or a church. But rationality had never governed Mabel's heart. "Come in, boys," she said, opening the door wider. "Come in and sit down. I'll make you something proper to eat." The boys hesitated, exchanging glances of disbelief. "Really?" the youngest one asked, his voice cracking with emotion. "You'd do that for us?" "Of course I would," Mabel replied, ushering them inside. "What kind of person would I be if I turned away hungry children? Now sit yourselves down at that table and tell me your names." As the boys settled into the creaky wooden chairs, they introduced themselves. The oldest was Marcus, a boy whose father had abandoned the family and whose mother had died the previous winter. The middle boy was Thomas, who had run away from an abusive foster home. The youngest was David, whose parents were addicts who had forgotten they had a son. Each story was more heartbreaking than the last, and Mabel felt tigers pricking at her eyes as she moved around her small kitchen, preparing what food she had. She made them scrambled eggs, toast with butter, and hot tea with sugar. It was simple fare, but to those 3 starving boys, it was a feast. They ate slowly at first, as if afraid the food might disappear, then more quickly as they realized Mabel meant for them to have it all. She sat with them, not eating herself, watching their faces transform from desperation to relief to something approaching happiness. "Miss Mabel," Marcus said between bites, "why are you being so nice to us? You don't know us. We could be bad kids." Mabel smiled, her weathered face crinkling with warmth. "I know hungry when I see it, child. And I know that every person deserves kindness, especially children. You boys didn't choose your circumstances, but you can choose your future. Don't you ever forget that." That night marked the beginning of something extraordinary. The boys returned the next evening, and the next, and the next. Each time Mabel fed them, and each time she shared stories and wisdom. She told them about resilience, about dignity, about the importance of education and hard work. She spoke to them about dreams and possibilities, about becoming more than their circumstances. "You boys are smart," she would say, ladling soup into their bowls. "I can see it in your eyes. You've got potential, and potential is like a seed. You've got to water it, give it sunlight, protect it from storms. Life has been hard on you, I know, but that doesn't mean it always will be." Thomas, the middle boy, once asked her, "But Miss Mabel, how can we do anything? We don't have homes. We don't have families who care. We don't have anything." Mabel had taken his face in her hands, looking directly into his eyes. "You have yourselves," she said firmly. "You have your minds, your hearts, your determination. I grew up poor, too, poorer than you can imagine. But I learned that poverty is a condition, not a character trait. You boys remember that. You are not your circumstances. You are what you choose to become." For 3 years, this routine continued. Mabel fed those boys almost every single night, even when it meant she went to bed hungry herself. She never complained, never asked for anything in return. She darned their clothes when they were torn. She helped them with schoolwork when they managed to attend school. She celebrated their small victories and consoled them through their defeats. Her tiny house became their sanctuary, and she became something they had never really had, a mother figure who believed in them unconditionally. But then came the day when the boys stopped coming. Mabel waited that first evening, keeping the food warm, watching the door. When they didn't arrive, she worried. The second day, she worried more. By the end of the week, she had to accept that they were gone. Perhaps they had moved to another city. Perhaps they had found other help. Perhaps something terrible had happened. She would never know, and the not knowing hurt more than she could express. She had loved those boys, and now they were gone, disappeared into the vast uncertainty that swallows so many forgotten children. Mabel continued her simple life, her heart a little heavier, her small house a little lonelier. Years passed, then decades. She grew, older, more frail, her poverty deepening as inflation eroded her fixed income. Her house fell into greater disrepair, the roof leaked, the furnace barely worked, and there were days when she wondered how much longer she could manage. But she never regretted those years of feeding the boys, never regretted the sacrifices she had made. If anything, those memories were her greatest treasure, proof that her life had mattered, that she had made a difference, however small. Then came that morning, 20 years after the boys had disappeared, when the Lamborghinis arrived. Mabel was in her kitchen, making her simple breakfast of toast and tea, when she heard the engines. She made her way slowly to the front window, her movements stiff with arthritis, and stared in complete bewilderment at the scene outside. 3 luxury sports cars, the kind she had only seen in magazines, were parked in front of her house, and 3 men, tall, confident, impeccably dressed, were walking toward her door. The knock, when it came, was firm and purposeful. Mabel opened the door with trembling hands, squinting up at the strangers on her porch. For a moment, she didn't recognize them. How could she? The last time she had seen them, they had been children, thin and desperate and dirty. But then the tallest one smiled, and she saw something familiar in his eyes. "Miss Mabel," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "It's us. Marcus, Thomas, and David. We've come home." Mabel's hand flew to her mouth, tears immediately streaming down her weathered cheeks. "My boys?" she whispered. "My boys? Is it really you?" "Yes, ma'am," David said, now the youngest, but still with that same gentle voice she remembered. "It's really us." They embraced her there on the porch, these three powerful men holding the tiny elderly woman who had saved their lives, all of them crying openly. Neighbors had gathered now, watching this extraordinary reunion, wondering what connection this poor old woman could possibly have to these obviously wealthy men. Inside Mabel's small house, sitting once again at her worn kitchen table, the men told their stories. Marcus had gone on to create a technology company that revolutionized online education, making him a billionaire before he turned 30. Thomas had become a real estate mogul, buying and renovating properties in forgotten neighborhoods, building affordable housing while making a fortune. David had invented a medical device that saved countless lives and earned him wealth beyond imagination. "But none of it would have happened without you, Miss Mabel," Marcus said, holding her small, wrinkled hand in his. "Every single day, when things got hard, when I wanted to give up, I remembered what you told me. I remembered that poverty was a condition, not a character trait. I remembered that I could choose my future." "You gave us more than food," Thomas added, his voice breaking. "You gave us dignity. You gave us hope. You showed us that we mattered, that someone cared whether we lived or died. Do you know what that meant to 3 kids who had nothing?" Mabel was crying too hard to speak, shaking her head in wonder at these men, these successful, powerful men who had once been desperate children at her table. "We've spent the last year looking for you," David said. "We never forgot you, never stopped being grateful. And now we're here to change your life the way you changed ours." They had brought lawyers, contractors, financial advisors. They wanted to buy her a new house, set up a trust fund, ensure she never wanted for anything again. But Mabel, through her tears, kept shaking her head. "I don't need a mansion," she said softly. "I don't need fancy things. All I ever needed was to know that you boys were okay, that you survived, that you thrived. That's enough for me. That's more than enough." "Please, Miss Mabel," Marcus pleaded, "let us do this. Let us give back even a fraction of what you gave us." In the iron-arched end, Mabel agreed to let them help, not because she wanted their money, but because she could see how important it was to them. They renovated her small house from top to bottom, making it warm and safe and comfortable. They set up accounts to ensure she never worried about bills again. But more importantly, they stayed in her life. They visited regularly, called her often, included her in their families. She became grandmother to their children, an honored guest at their celebrations, a cherished part of their lives. The story of Mabel and her boys spread throughout the community and eventually across the country. News outlets covered it, social media shared it, and people everywhere were moved by this testament to the power of kindness. But Mabel never sought attention or praise. She remained the same humble, loving woman she had always been, living in her small house, now renovated, grateful for every day she had with the boys who had become her family. On her 93rd birthday, surrounded by Marcus, Thomas, David, and their families, Mabel reflected on her life. "You know," she said, her voice soft but clear, "people think you boys became billionaires and came back to save me. But the truth is, you saved me long before that. You gave meaning to my life. You showed me that love given is never wasted, that kindness creates ripples we can't even imagine. Marcus knelt beside her chair, taking her hand. We learned everything important from you, Miss Mabel. Success isn't measured in money. It's measured in the lives we touch, the love we share, the difference we make. This is the truth that Mabel's story teaches us all. Kindness is never small, even when it seems insignificant. A meal shared, a word of encouragement, a moment of genuine care. These simple acts can change the trajectory of a life. Mabel didn't have wealth or power or influence. She had only her compassion and her willingness to share what little she had. But that was enough to transform 3 hopeless boys into successful men who never forgot where they came from or who helped them get there. The real magic of this story isn't that 3 billionaires returned in Lamborghinis to reward kindness. The real magic is that one woman, despite her own poverty and struggles, chose love over fear, generosity over scarcity, hope over despair. She planted seeds of possibility in broken hearts and watered them with consistent, unconditional care. And those seeds grew into something beautiful, something that changed not just those 3 lives, but countless others through the ripple effects of their success and their own commitment to giving back. So ask yourself today, what seeds of kindness can you plant? What simple act of love might change someone's entire life? You don't need wealth or power to make a difference. You just need a willing heart and the courage to care. Because, as Mabel proved, the smallest acts of kindness can yield the most extraordinary harvests. Share this story if it moved you, and more importantly, go out and create your own story of compassion. The world is waiting for your kindness. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, like, and comment your thoughts and where you are watching from. This is your way of supporting this channel. God bless.